Alright guys, so today we're going to be checking out a request from Z71 on the Discord, and it is The Tragic Fall of the Noble Thousand Sons, as done by Majorkill. Now, the Thousand Sons hold a place for me as having the second most tragic story of the entire Horus Heresy and how everything wound up being the way it's come out to be. Mainly because of the fact that, one, I don't really think they deserved what happened to them. And two, Magnus, even though he did everything the wrong way, he was trying to do the right thing. He just had an overinflated opinion of his own abilities. So, there's so much lore into the history of the Thousand Sons. There's so much that they tried to do, and they wound up becoming, in the end, trying to avoid what happened to them, the very thing that everyone was convinced that they were. They were not a legion of chaos-possessed sorcerers until they literally fell to it out of a need for pure survival. So, let's check out what Majorkill has to say. Here we go.
G'day guys and gal. Warhammer 40k isn't just all the time. It has elements of romance, comedy, horror, and most impactful of all, tragedy. The entire Horus Heresy was a tragedy. The life of Angron was a tragedy.
Yes.
But most tragic of all was the fall of the Thousand Sons, a legion of progressive, noble, and enlightened men who cared about innocent humans, who tried their best to do what was right, and who only really ended up in the clutches of hell because of the extreme arrogance and stupidity of their Primarch.
True.
When I first learned about the Thousand Sons, I thought their ultimate fate was deserved, as they were reckless and self-interested with the use of their forbidden sorcery and rituals. I even thought it may have been Magnus keeping them in check, but no, they did not deserve their fate, and they were honestly the most kind, caring, and considerate legion during the Great Crusade. Kinda even than the Salamanders. Before we get started, the Majorkill plushie is here and ready.
I want that. I honestly think they were right up there with the Salamanders, but you can't beat the hug factor of the Salamanders. You just can't.
To party. Based off my own logo and coming with a pretty familiar firearm, this dude makes the perfect toy for you, or literally anyone in your life. Like, anyone. He's only got like 2 weeks left before he's gone for good, so definitely a collector item, especially if I've already got the first one. To add some more sugar to the pot, just like last time, anyone who buys this plush and sends me the order confirmation on email or Discord will get a custom message from me. I'm not joking, look at all the ones I did last time. We want to sell at least 400 of these bad boys, so why not get in on the fun? Get a plush and a custom cameo from the shittest content creator on YouTube. Today we'll go over the tragic fall of the Thousand Sons, highlighting all the cool selfless stuff they did for others, as well as what tragic things happened to them that was genuinely out of their control. This won't just be a lore retelling, more so how unfair it was to be a Thousand Son in 40k. Let's get into it. From their inception, the Thousand Sons were low-key screwed. Titsnitch had them by the balls, and was slowly turning each of them into a chaos spawn. The exact reasoning why Titsnitch seemed to have some kind of claim on them was unclear, but my theory is that as each Primarch was a warp god, the Emperor only had a certain degree of control over how they would turn out. Otherwise, we would have gotten 20 Guillimans. As such, it's likely Magnus's warp god soul was highly psychic and volatile, with Titsnitch able to create backdoors into the gene seed it produced. Either way, the Thousand Sons were in for a shit time, with themselves or their brothers randomly turning into abominations that needed to be put down or locked away. When Magnus was discovered, there was
See, even back then, they didn't, like, when the flesh change would happen, they didn't know what they were becoming. They just considered it a genetic abnormality, but they were becoming chaos spawns, but they didn't even have the vernacular to describe them back then. They just didn't. Come on. My mouse is going out, guys, sorry. Come on.
Barely any Thousand Sons left. The Emperor was prepared to create a new legion for Magnus, using his own gene seed instead of the Big Red's tainted cum. However, Magnus was adamant on saving his legion, delving deep into the warp and encountering Titsnitch. Now, Magnus wasn't aware that this entity was the demon god of manipulation, so after a struggle, Magnus was able to seemingly dominate and force the warp entity to stop his sons from suffering the flesh change. In exchange, Magnus sacrificed one of his eyes, and it worked. not because Magnus actually dominated Titsnitch, but because Titsnitch allowed Magnus to think he beat him, to fuel Magnus into becoming an extremely arrogant person. Magnus had decided that he was the greatest psyker in the galaxy, second only to his father, but as time went on, Magnus's arrogance became so much that even he thought he was the greatest psyker than the Emperor. Yeah, Magnus was a bit of a dipshit. With their
Magnus was utterly convinced that he knew better than the Emperor about the dangers of the warp, and that just drives me crazy.
second lease on life, the Thousand Sons strode forth into the galaxy, using their psychic powers to destroy otherwise unbeatable foes of mankind, saving entire human populations when other legions would have just orbitally bombed the world to dust. Their power was insane, and it meant that there was no enemy too great. Now, as I said, a lot of people thought the Thousand Sons were way too extreme and arrogant with their powers, but this wasn't the case. They treated their powers with caution and respect. Nobody went Super Saiyan Demon mode, and each Thousand Son was taught something called the Renumerations, basically different tiers of meditative states which allowed them to control their emotions, which in turn allowed them to control their power. Each Thousand Son would also join a specific fellowship depending on their power. So if you were an offensive firecaster, you would join one fellowship. If you could see the future, then you would join the Corvidae fellowship, and so on. This meant that the Thousand Sons could focus on one thing and not become overwhelmed or arrogant in their diverse power. Many Thousand Sons also had these cute little warp pets, familiars, that would follow them around and occasionally lend them power. These warp pets would later be revealed to have a dark purpose, compounding to their overall tragedy. But for now, they were like little spirit cats. The Thousand Sons' homeworld of Prospero was an unrivaled paradise. Magnus had taken a blasted world full of psychic insectoids that planted eggs in your brain and turned it into a lush verdant forest world with mighty cities. It was said that Tiska, the City of Light, was the closest thing to heaven in the galaxy that there was. Order, education, high quality of living. The Thousand Sons also actively helped their citizens and formed friendships with them. Cancer wasn't a thing on Prospero, as the Thousand Sons would use the warp to cure it from the citizens. When an off-world visitor to Prospero got the psychic eggs in her brain, a team of Thousand Sons captains spent hours performing an extremely grueling psychic surgery in order to save her life and remove the eggs. Pretty much any other legion would have been like, sorry, too busy. However, many other legions didn't see things like this. Every legion had fought against evil psykers, psychic xenos, or warp predators at least once during the Great Crusade. Everyone knew how dark and twisted the powers of the warp could be, so when they saw the Thousand Sons using that same power, they became distrustful, with a few even becoming outright hostile. Magnus, in his arrogance, didn't do much to allay these fears or try and enlighten his brothers, more so just thought they were bigots and told them to get fucked. To his credit, Ahriman tried really hard to form a friendship with the Space Wolf Rune Priest, as a way of hopefully showing the Space Wolves that the Thousand Sons were a benevolent legion, with nothing to fear. However, this would later
Othere, weird make.
bite Ahriman in the ass in a tragic way. During an operation with the Thousand Sons, Space Wolves, and Wordbearers against a non-compliant human world, Magnus wanted to save the world's library and record its knowledge. Lehman wanted to burn everything. This brought the legions into conflict, which ended when one of the Thousand Sons turned into a chaos spawn in front of everyone. Lehman was disgusted, and with some support from a few of the other Primarchs, petitioned the Emperor to form a conclave and decide on the future of the Psykers. Now, the Emperor is the greatest Psyker to ever live. He also can't be fucked dealing with this shit, and he obviously supports Psykers and knows humanity is ascending to become a psychic race. However, some of the reports of the Thousand Sons had been disturbing, and the Emperor also wanted to keep peace with his anti-Psyker Primarchs, so he called together the Council of Nicaea, also known as the Trial of Magnus. Various Primarchs and other important Imperials gathered together and debated the future use of Psykers. Mortarion and Lehman were anti-Psyker, with the Space Wolf that Ahriman had befriended speaking out against them as well. It turns out he had just faked the friendship with Ahriman to learn more about them. The Thousand Sons detractors spoke coldly and logically, with a lot of accusation. Magnus's response, on the other hand, was foolish. He told a story that would act as a metaphor and analogy in one. It was a nice story, and it won the hearts and minds of numerous people. However, the Emperor isn't a sucker, and saw through the story, seeing just how arrogant and careless Magnus had become. With the Emperor's Webway project so close to completion, the Emperor couldn't risk Magnus's foolishness ruining everything, especially since Magnus was the only Primarch who was aware of the Emperor's Webway project. So the Emperor banned the use of psychic powers outside the essentials, more or less banning the Thousand Sons from being themselves, all because Magnus wouldn't address the issues and accusations until it was too late, and when he finally did, he chose to tell a story instead of being cold and logical. Now things would have been okay if the Thousand Sons then returned to Prospero and adhered to the Emperor's edict, or at least toned it down. Instead of doing rituals and shooting lightning out of their dickholes, they could have just, done the cancer curing stuff. Then after a time they could have let things cool off and wait for the Big E to finish his Webway project and be in a better mood. But no, almost instantly Magnus began using warp powers again and put zero restrictions on his sons, restrictions they would have followed if he had placed them. He then did some hectic warp voodoo to astrally project into Horus's dream to try save his soul, and when that failed, he astrally raped the Emperor's Webway project in order to try warn his father about Horus. Magnus is ruining—
There's no other way to say what he did. He absolutely just, it's because of Magnus that the Imperium is in the state that it's in, just saying.
Of the Webway project was the single most devastating blow to the Loyalists that could have occurred. It basically wiped out 90% of the Custodians and Sisters of Silence, confined the Emperor to the Golden Throne, and ruined humanity's only genuine chance at total victory over chaos. Magnus's actions that his sons actually told him not to do, damned the entire Legion. But even now it wasn't too late. The Emperor had sent his Custodians and Space Wolves to retrieve Magnus and to help fix the Golden Throne and Webway. Magnus knew they were coming and felt really bad about what he did, so he blocked the Thousand Sons' vision and cut off his world's communication. He intended to basically suicide himself, his world, and his Legion to try and make amends for his mistakes, which only fucked everything more. If Magnus had straight out to meet Lehman on his ship, responded to Lehman's hails, and then promised to go peacefully with him back to Terra, then sweet. No Fall of Prospero, no Chaos Magnus. Instead, he hid in his tower having a sook while his world was bombed into dust and his sons were massacred. If his sons knew what was coming, they could have formulated a diplomatic plan or an evacuation, but no. They only found out as the bombs were dropping. Even when the first line of Space Wolves charged, Ahriman hesitated before firing at them. He understood the sickening gravity of Astartes versus Astartes bloodshed. Even when these hated rivals were genociding his world, he still hesitated because he and his Thousand Sons were men of nobility. Most tragic of all, the fall of Prospero and the killing of the Thousand Sons and Magnus are still seen as a noble endeavor 10,000 years later, as in their desperation to defend themselves, the Thousand Sons unleashed their full power, using the most horrific warp sorcery to viciously kill the invaders. Many of them turned into Chaos Spawn as a result, with one of their captains even allowing Constantine Valdor to put him out of his misery due to him turning into a monster. It was also here that the Thousand—
That was one of the most depressing moments in the lore, flat out of that book when Valdor, just the guy knew what he had become and he allowed Valdor to kill him because he knew what he was becoming and he didn't want to be that.
Sons' warp pets turned on their masters, overloading them with power, which caused a number of Thousand Sons to explode or turn into Chaos Spawn. Almost every captain of each fellowship died a tragic death on Prospero. None of them died with glory. Even when Magnus took Titsnich's bargain and teleported his sons to the planet of sorcerers, their tragedy was just beginning. The few survivors began mutating into Chaos Spawn, which forced Ahriman to perform his rubric, a ritual that was supposed to cure them, however instead turned most of the Thousand Sons into rubric marines, more or less robots. Only a handful of the Thousand Sons maintained their consciousness and form. Ahriman performed the rubric out of love for his brothers and his desire to save them, but alas, the tragedy only deepened. Even despite the Imperium fucking them over, Chaos toying with them, their Primarch repeatedly lying and hurting them, and their current predicament, the Thousand Sons remain noble in their own way. Ahriman's goal is to undo the rubric and bring his dusty brothers back to flesh and blood. The Thousand Son Vistario sacrificed his life to protect Rylanor, was a loyalist Marine's Sol from Fulgrim. I wouldn't call them good guys, but they are definitely the least evil of the bad bunch. I honestly cannot fault them on anything. They were loyal to their Primarch and followed his lead as any good Space Marine would. They were careful with the warp and developed numerous discipline techniques to protect themselves from chaotic corruption. They loved and nurtured mortals, teaching them psychic powers and going out of their way to protect them. Even during the Fall of Prospero, a massive priority for Ironman was protecting the civilians and getting them to safety.
Yes.
Their only real invasions of real space have been against the Space Wolves for obvious reasons. They don't just attack random worlds and have blood orgies in the viscera of the innocent. Nobody deserved their fate less than the Thousand Sons, and if they had been treated right, Horus never even would have stepped foot in the Sol system. It was just bad luck, a shit Primarch, and the fear of the ignorant that led these noble men down the path to damnation. If you enjoyed the video and you want to support the channel, then pick up a Majorkill plushie. Remember, you'll get a custom video message alongside each purchase. Hit the subscribe button and hit the real subscribe button for more tragic content. Join the Discord for more memes and I'll see you in the next.
Oh my god. My mouse is driving me crazy, guys. Especially when I'm trying to edit right now. It's really beginning to get stressful. Thousand Sons, what can you say about them? Are they the nicest of the traders? I'd say so. From a certain point of view. They'll still turn you inside out and feed you to a whole bunch of really weird things, but at the same time, there's so much about them that just beggars belief as far as, you know, where they came from, as far as their backstory, what happened to them, what led them down the path to being, you know, basically pawns of Tzeentch. It's really one of the saddest stories in 40k as far as the Imperium goes. And he's exactly right. If the Thousand Sons had a Primarch with like 2 grams of sense thrown in, when it really mattered, when Horus arrived on Terra, he would have been fighting somebody that was an expert. He would have been fighting a group that was an expert in fighting the very allies he had sought to bring. A loyalist Thousand Sons at 33,000 strong would have held. They would have never even been able to set foot on Terra. It wouldn't have been a possibility. They wouldn't have been able to do it. It's just the way it is, guys. Just sad face when it comes to the Thousand Sons. All of Majorkill's links are going to be in the description down below. Go check him out, of course, if you haven't already. I don't know how you found me without having found him first. If you'd like to support the channel, hitting the like and subscribe button is a great way to do it. Guys, I will catch you on the next one. Yeah, the only one that I think had a sadder origin than the Thousand Sons would, of course, be Angron. But that's a story for another time.